So I went to Liverpool with that background, and on day one, I met Roger McGough, ran into him, physically bumped into him in a bookshop. You know, he was nerding one way and I was nerding the other way. And he said, "Oh, Andy, what are you doing here?" I said, "I've come to go to the university." And I'd had all my hair cut off because I'd grown it during my gap year. And I was looking every inch of law student. Yeah, well, you know, tonight, come to the Philharmonic pub, I'll introduce you around, you know. And so the rot set in. I knew, within a day, I knew I wasn't going to get a degree worth having either. You know, I did get one, but, you know, very lowly, you know. But I also knew I was going to have a bloody good time in Liverpool, you know. So within 4 months, obviously once he introduced me around, I mean, all these people, and it was all centred on, in those days, the Philharmonic Hotel and the Crack in Rice Street, which is another old pub. And it was the art college crowd, really. But it was the poets and the people that hung around, and the Everyman Theatre, which was around the corner. So you can say, I just loved theatre. I was always drawn into theatre work, and I loved poetry. I mean, I totally never really met a lot of poets. I'd seen poetry and jazz in Cambridge when I was at public school. Went to see people like Laurie Lee and Danny Absey working with Jerry Robson, working with the Michael Garrick trio with Shake Keane and Joe Harriott. Joe Harriott, wonderful alto player. So I'd seen poetry working with music. I thought largely it didn't work. Yeah. Which led me on to when Roger said, "Oh, it'd be nice to collaborate on something," and he did that fairly soon after I got to Liverpool. But I mean, pretty much before the end of '65, I think. The first thing we ever did was February '66 at the Blue Coat Theatre, the Sandon Theatre in the Blue Coat Chambers. And it was just me and Roger.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because the American beat movement, when they went into music, it was very much kind of, they were at war with each other. You know, they'd say a few words and then there'd be a wild saxophone bit. Yeah. And it didn't really...
I didn't think it...
Adrian, of course, summed that up quite well, I think, at one point, where he said, you know, music and the words and the music should flow together, should work together.
Yeah. Well, certainly with Adrian, I achieved that really well, and he was very intuitive. He was like an instrumentalist that didn't play an instrument, you know. He was very good, and he listened very well. But I always saw the role of the music to be, it's a description I've used many times, which is that the music should lay a carpet for the poem to walk on. And in the way that if you walk into a room with a fantastically, beautifully woven Persian carpet, it's not necessarily the thing that obsesses your eye because you're looking above it, you're looking at the people, you're looking at the furniture, but it's always there. And the moment that you avert your eyes and look at it, my God, it's magnificent. And that's what I felt the music should be. It should be great, but it shouldn't intrude on the reason for its place within the ensemble, which is to support the poem. The poem is the main thing. So that was what I took into the work with Roger originally, and then soon after that with Brian down initially in London, and with Adrian. Brian Patton, yes. Also, I was working at the Everyman Theatre who loved me because I was free most of the time. I was such a nerd for performance. I get up and do anything, anytime.
I know Allen Ginsberg came over and he was staying on Brian Patton's
that was before my time. Yeah.
But I love the fact he said Liverpool at the present moment is a centre of consciousness of the human universe, to which Brian Patton replied, I think Alan believed that the centre of the universe to be wherever he was at the time, which is a lovely way of putting it. But I love that line.
I only met Allen Ginsberg one time because I wasn't in Liverpool when he came up. That was just before that summer of '65. I think it was '65 he was in Liverpool. Anyway, doesn't matter. Lost the thread now. Alan. I met Alan one time, and that was when Adrian and I went as the sort of precursors for the entire Liverpool Scene band in 1969. We went to New York. We went over 10 days earlier than the band to kind of fluff up the material. Was the idea that we would kind of adapt it as if you could for American audiences. But because of Adrian's connection with Alan, they corresponded and all this sort of thing. He called up Alan and we met just up from Fillmore East at this place called the Gem Spa, where Alan introduced these things called egg creams, which was sort of like ice cream soda, basically. And we had a few of them, and then we went back to his apartment in on the where was it, Lower East Side, and sort of around Tompkins Square, and we spent the evening with him, and it was a really fun evening actually, singing William Blake. We were sort of making up tunes and by turning Blake poems into songs and stuff. It had a wonderful time. I thought he was great. I enjoyed his company, but that was the only time I ever met him. The Liverpool Scene book, it came out, that was because of the patronage of Edward Lucy Smith, really. Teddy was really, he saw the poetry, he loved it, he liked the performance nature of it, and championed it, and eventually put a book together, which came out in, I think, 1967, called The Liverpool Scene. And things came, because of that publication, things emerged from it. One of which was a BBC thing called, there was a strand called, I think, Look at Life, presented by a guy called Dennis Toohey. And we came down and played on that. But at that point, some of the poetry and music was just poetry and beat music, like there was a band called the Almost Blues in Liverpool, led by a guy called Alan Peters, and that he was, again, like me, he liked poetry and was put up against, so it was sort of, if Adrian wrote his In the Midnight Hour, then they would play Wilson Pickett's Midnight Hour and Adrian's poem would be kind of grafted onto it, which is not the way that I particularly saw it, but that sort of thing was going, that was done for BBC Two. But no, what happened was we did a London performance at the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Art, but in those days it was in Dover Street, which is just off Piccadilly.
When you say we, that was you and Adrian?
Me and Adrian, Roger, Brian, and various others, Pete Brown and whatever. And what had happened, because of the TV thing, this guy, an American lyricist called Hal Shaper, who was into publishing, music publishing, and had written good tunes in his day, standards, got in touch with us up in Liverpool and said he'd like to record us doing stuff on the basis that he'd seen us doing on the BBC Two TV thing. So it was arranged that Hal would come down to the performance at the ICA, and then after that we would go off and he would book a recording studio and we would, in quotes, make a record. So he came along, but for various reasons he decided that what he wanted to record was Adrian, Roger and Brian Patton. The others not so much, and they were the principal participants in the Liverpool Scene book, I suppose, and me as musical accompanist. So the four of us were taken off to Regent Sound in Denmark Street, real Tim Pernally studio, where loads of early British records had been made. And in the course of 2 hours in mono, we made this record. But what happened was that Brian, by then, we didn't start till about midnight. Brian was absolutely paralytic and not happy. He'd already begun to evolve his theories that, it was all showbiz and he didn't want to be a part of it. He wanted to be a real poet, and real poets don't get up on stage and cavort around. So he didn't, he was distancing himself from what was obviously because of the book and the attention that was focused on the TV thing. He was, no, I'm not going to do that. So he backed out, and he actually got up very drunkenly, and I remember him saying that when it was his turn to record a poem on the microphone, he lunged forward to the microphone and said, Roger used to be a poet, Adrian is a clown, I'd rather be a real poet than earn £1 million. And he turned around and walked out of the studio. The end. So that left Adrian, Roger and me to make a record, and that was the record you're referring to, which was called The Incredible New Liverpool Scene, although the band The Liverpool Scene came later. But that came out, and that in itself spawned good things. It's always been sort of, for me, it's just follow your nose. One thing begets another,
I believe you.
Yeah, it's the biblical thing.
Yes.
But always have something to do. Don't sit at home doing nothing, just if an opportunity presents itself, take it.
Absolutely.
That February '66 was having got to Liverpool as a student in September '65. February '66 was the first performance I did with Roger, and soon after that, by about May or June '66, I had been asked to work with the Scaffold in a sort of music accompaniment thing, because they're none of them instrumentalists, and they were beginning to write songs. Mike was writing songs, Roger setting lyrics of Roger's and some of his own, and they were beginning to see music as a necessary adjunct. They'd been signed by Brian Epstein, so they had a management backing. Epstein, because of his connections, got them a recording contract with Parlophone, so they needed a musical element, and I became the enabler for that. So I worked with them then for a couple of years.
Did you play on all their records?
No, not all. I did do a live album with them at what eventually became Abbey Road, but it was EMI Studios in those days, but the classic kind of St John's Wood studio. Did a live album and played on
Lily the Pink.
Played on Lily the Pink, notably. And
you've
also
got a #1 record in your...
yeah, well, I don't know, was it ever #1? I'm not sure
Yeah.
It was. It was a big hit one Christmas.
Yeah.
We'll drink a drink a drink a lily the pink, the pink, the pink, the saviour of the human race. For she invented medicinal compound, most efficacious in every case. Mr. Frias had sticky out ears, and it made him awful shy, and so they gave him medicinal compound. Now you see, but never heard anti-milly and willy-nilly, and so they put her in a home where they gave her medicinal compound, and now he joins in all the games. He'll drink a lily, the pink, the pink, the pink, the saviour of the human race.
That was good. It was a good experience. That was done at EMI as well. In Studio 2, which is the classic Beatles studio that you see in all the clips. And then later on I recorded with them right through, because when the Grimm's concept emerged, then I was still working with them. But also we did this album which has turned in, it's a bit sort of legendary now. At the time, not so much. Roger and Mike got in touch with me.
The McGough and the McGear.
McGough and McGear, yeah. And they said, look, it was fairly well understood that this was before Lily had come out. So we might have recorded it, but it was all sort of a bit last ditch. Of course, Eppie had gone by then. He was not alive. And they were thinking of disbanding. They were thinking that the Scaffold basically didn't have any sort of forward motion, and that they probably would stop it. But they got material in the bank, songs that they'd written together. And Paul had given Mike, he as a gift, had said, look, come to London, I'll help you out with, we'll get some action on the publishing on those songs of yours and all this sort of thing. Come to London, we'll demo the material, so that it can be played around. So I'll fix a studio and some sessions and some players and come down. So
you should mention that we're talking about Paul McCartney here. Right?
Well, Mike,
I
mean, he was, of course, in those days he called himself Mike McGear to distance himself. He was Mike McCartney, as he's reverted to being, quite rightly. So I came down in the back of Mike's car, basically, guitar and me in the back of whatever, fancy car he was driving at the time, and stayed for a couple of nights, 2-3 nights, at Paul's house in St John's Wood, in Cavendish Avenue. And the sessions were set in this studio called Delane Lee, which was on Kingsway. We went in through an underground car park and into a studio there. And my job was just I knew the material because I'd worked with them up in Liverpool, and I knew the chords to the songs, everything. So obviously everything, as we went from song to song, I was necessarily the guy playing the rhythm part that was, that they were, all the initial stuff was sung to. So Paul was producing, he booked the studio, but what he'd done, obviously, was go round all of his showbiz mates and say, hey, I'm recording with our kid at Delane Lee, why don't you come down, it didn't kick off till about 10 o'clock at night, every night, And everybody kind of rolled in from the Bag of Nails or the Scottish St James. And it was just, every time the door opened, it was like another illustration from Melody Maker walked in, you know what I mean? The only people that were unknown were me and Dave Mason, who just joined Traffic. And the rest of them were all kind of name players. So I was slightly in awe of it all. I mean, I've never had a real sort of, you know, hero worship of the stars, in quotes. But the central role was Paul producing, obviously Roger and Mike presenting their material, and I had to be on everything. So, I mean, it put me right in the middle of it. So I got to play with all sorts of brilliant people. Graham Nash was there all the time, helping along, singing and doing stuff. I loved the one with Jimi Hendrix. There were, all sorts of people just rocked up and did stuff. So that was a great thing, but it was not a commercial release. It was not intended for release. It was meant to be demo.
They were under contract. They couldn't even.
You couldn't name them. It was for your ears only. It was just purely to demo the songs. But then later on, Parlophone, you know, they heard the tape and they went, "What? You're kidding? You know, we'll put that out," and sort of hint at the names, but not actually put any names on it. Because for a long time, if you were signed to one record company, you weren't allowed to record for another one. Nobody gives a monkeys now because nobody's signed to anybody. But, you know, in those days, that was a big deal.
Do you want to do it then?
Yes, please.
Go.
They say the sun shone now and again, but it was generally cloudy with far too much rain. They say the greatest train robbery in history took place. Probably students. Who else would steal a train? They say cabinet ministers and osteopaths were particularly vulgar around this time. They say babies were born, married couples made love, often with each other, and people died, sometimes violently. They say it was an average, ordinary, moderate, run-of-the-mill, common or garden summer, but it wasn't. For I locked the yellow door, and I threw away the key, and I spent summer with Monica, and Monica spent summer with me. Unlike everybody else, we made friends with the weather. Most days the sun cold and sprawled all over the place, or the wind blew in as breezily as ever, and ran its fingers through our hair. But usually it's the moon that kept us company. Some days we thought about the seaside, and built sandcastles on the blankets and paddled in the pillows, or swam in the...
What I found interesting was that there was all this in the new sleep notes, blah 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 blah, and I looked through it all in a few places, and I couldn't find your name anywhere.
No, because...
And what amused me most was I dug up the cover of the LP, and yours was the only musical name on there, which I thought was brilliant. So you kind of sort of airbrushed out the modern stuff because yours is not the same.
You've got to remember, Nick, that I was at the time that I was making this and Lily the Pink, I was a law student in Liverpool. I was at Liverpool University doing a law degree. There was literally 2 months ago for Hildegard Neal, lovely Hildy, who was acting in the repertory company at the Everyman, and I did a play for Pete James, who was the director all through my time in Liverpool, and also gave me the chance to write my first musical in 1973. But Hildegard was the principal actress of the rep company, and I was cast as an actor in a piece called The Sport of My Mad Mother, an Angelico play, which I loved doing with Bill Stewart and a good cast of Everyman regulars. And that was an acting job. I had to play drums in the course of the thing because it was like about sort of tribal, a youth gang, you know, it had sort of tribal overtones. That was the idea of it. And Hildy played the central character in that. So I'd done a lot of other things, you know, that weren't musical, that were to do with just my obsession with theatre. I mean, I would go to everything at the Everyman, and I loved the building, and I loved the actors, and that was another thing, you know. But yeah, it was all while I was a student. As I say, the Everyman loved me because I pretty much do anything. They did pay me for sport, but pretty much anything I'd do for nothing because I just loved getting up and doing it.
67, then I've got to mention John Peel.
Ah, well, that was from that record that I did with Ros McGough and Adrian Henri, the original Liverpool Scene album that we did with Hal Shaper. When it came out, there's good stories there actually. First of all, Hal tried selling it to various record labels. It eventually came out on CBS here, and which was epic in America because it was released in America as well. But he tried to sell it certainly to Decca, and Tony Hall at Decca said, "No, I'd quite like to put it out, Hal, but no, the board won't have it. They say it's all down to wanking and drugs." And that was because there's a Roger McGough poem that starts it off called "For You Everything's Going to Be All Right," and it's got great lines in it. And one of the lines was, "For you, marijuana will be on sale in the foyer," and another one was, "For you, they will discover that masturbation is a cure for cancer." So Tony Hawk's, that's all down to wanking and drugs. And when the record came out, both of those lines excised, right? And they got a coherent, flowing musical accompaniment that just goes da da da, and it just jumps over the lines. It was completely arbitrary, but Hal had to cut them out. He had to edit those two lines out because it was all down to wanking and drugs, you know. So those are the times you're dealing with. But it came out on CBS, and it was, I mean, it was in the era of underground, you know. Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was part of what was going on. And John was, then, he'd come back from America, but he was, as John Peel, he was on Radio London, which was offshore pirate radio. He used to do this show called The Perfume Garden, which I first heard about from International Times, because my parents lived in London. When I wasn't at university in Liverpool, I would go home. I didn't stay in Liverpool with nothing much to do, living in a single room. I'd go home and get pampered, you know, and then get my washing done and then go back to university. Because I was all this time, I was having to show up to lectures and do stuff, you know. And I was doing the regular, you know, university folk club and all that kind of stuff, and going to the Saturday night gigs. All the usual university stuff. So John, on Perfume Garden, which I heard once he started doing it, he broadcast from midnight to 2 a.m. every night. And he'd started playing the stuff which was becoming increasingly important to me, which was the psychedelia. You know, he'd play the Jefferson Airplane, he'd play Country Joe and the Fish, he'd play Dantalian's Chariot and The Misunderstood, and, you know, all of these great underground classics, and Arthur Brown, you know, and Elba Gantry's Velvet Opera, all this stuff. And he started playing our album. I'd never been on the radio before, never heard anything on the radio that I'd been involved with. He'd play a track, but then he'd play one track, then he'd go, and he'd play a side to an album. You know, he'd play poem after poem after poem, it was all there. So I was back at home, and I knew he was doing this, and he'd do it night after night. He was very obsessed with it because it was Liverpool, that ticked the box for him. And he just, you know, it was a decent album, it was fun. For its time, it really had got something to say. So, but the Peel thing was just simply that I was at home and I saw an advert in Melody Maker for one of those underground things, you know, like probably Implosion or something, at the Roundhouse, and it said DJ John Peel. And I thought, I've got to meet this guy because he keeps playing this stuff every night. And there was obviously, I don't know what the band was, but it was somebody that I was interested in. So I went to the gig, and at some point in the evening, I sidled up to John, who was there playing records or, you know, hanging about, and introduced myself. And he just sort of fell on me like a long lost brother, and just loved the fact that, so he must come round. So he was living in a basement flat on at the bad end of the King's Road, down in sort of Putney, Fulham end. And he was still married to his first wife, Shirley, then. So I used to go round when I was back in London. And then he started visiting us up in Liverpool as well. And he'd come and sleep on the floor, sleeping bag at 64 Canning Street. And he became really integral to just the whole underground scene in Liverpool. And, he through the sort of Adrian Rogers, Scaffold, Liverpool Scene, the poets, the everyone, whatever, he tapped into all of that. So when he got a bit more profile, which came on the back of the Marine Offences Act, because they put the pirates out of business, basically, towards the end of '67, this thing called the Marine Offences, which said you cannot broadcast. They were just outside territorial waters, but the Navy could come in and arrest him. So that just blew them out of the water, metaphorically. And he got his first gig, which was a show called Top Gear on Radio 1, which was a Sunday afternoon. It was a 2-hour show, and he shared it with Tommy Vance, about as incongruous a pairing as you can imagine. So Tommy did an hour, and people did an hour.
Love is feeling cold in the back of vans. Love is a fan club with only 2 fans. Love is walking, holding paint-stained hands. Love is fish and chips on winter nights. Love is blankets full of strange.
But by then, universities who had, a little underground show that they put on a Saturday afternoon, that sort of thing, they were inviting him to do, why don't you come, we're doing, Loughborough Tech, can you come and play some records and talk about music to us? So he would do it, and he said, you don't have to pay me, I'm paid by the BBC, but I want you to book these people. And it was a small clique of bands. So by then, Liverpool Scene was going as a poetry band. That was me and Adrian and Mike Hart, Mike Evans. It was Tyrannosaurus Rex, Roy Harper, Davy Graham playing acoustic guitar, wonderful, the great acoustic guitarist. Can't think who else. Principal Edward's Magic Theatre, they emerged from that. And so he'd say, you've got to book at least 2 of these people, and then I'll come and do it for nothing. So he really patronised a very defined area that were the Peel artists, So we got work out of that, and that started breaking us, because when we first started playing as a band, which really happened on the back of my graduation. I graduated in July '68, and the day that I graduated was the day that Adrian Henri handed in his notice as a lecturer at Liverpool College of Art, and we became a full-time band. And then this lovely man called Sandy Robertson got in touch with me before that, wanting us to record as a band. We were able to move along with that, and he got us signed to RCA Records, and we came down in September of 1968 and made our first album. Made in a day, made and mixed the following morning. It was one day, that was it. 2 3-hour sessions, and then a 3-hour mix down session the next day, and back to Liverpool. And that came out, and it was Amazing Adventures of, and it sold really well, and that started the ball rolling. Before that, it was a big deal if we played in Warrington. After that, we were playing in Plymouth, Newcastle, and London.
Not to mention the Isle of Wight.
And that came a year later. By then, we were well established. But Sandy was a great operator. He managed us, he published us, he produced us. He was Svengali the whole thing into existence. And not just us, he had a stable of artists, but he really put us on the map.
Tonight, at noon, supermarkets will advertise threepence extra on everything. Tonight, at noon, children from happy families will be sent to live in a home. Elephants will tell each other human jokes. America will declare peace on Russia. World War I generals will sell poppies in the streets on November the 11th. The first daffodils of autumn will appear when the leaves fall upwards.
But, I mean, we had personnel changes. We lost Mike Hart quite early in the thing. Sort of October 68 or something like that. Harty was gone. And it was like lancing a boil in a sense. You know, that often happens with bands. I mean, at the time we thought, oh God, because he's such a wonderful singer and writer, we thought, oh, it's going to leave a huge hole. First show we played with him not there, we played so well. And we immediately gelled in a different way, and it became musically a much richer experience. It was just the making of the band, really, and we no holding back. And we just flew with that, and then we toured with Led Zeppelin in sort of May, June of '69. The first UK tour, which didn't even sell out. Amazingly, I remember playing the Colston Hall and thinking, where are they? Where are the people? I thought there was half empty. You know, ridiculous for a Led Zeppelin concert. Imagine. You know, but in '69, that was their first UK tour. Half the people didn't know who they were. They were caught between that. Is it the New Yardbirds? Is it Led Zeppelin? You know, who's in it? All that thing, you know. So it was very early days for them, but they went off like a train because they were such a big, sexy rock act, you know. Whereas we were just a weird parochial poetry and jazz thing, you know. And then the Isle of Wight came later on that summer. At the Bath Festival, and then we went off to America, September of '60.
Do the Dylan Rock! The Dylan Rock!
This was a sample of what they'd come for. 170,000 pop fans invaded the Isle of Wight for the three-day festival of music. Bob Dylan was the star. But while they waited for the top spot artist, there was plenty of other with it music and plenty of groups to provide it. This was the Liverpool Scene.
Under 800 gallons of ice cream soda. Bobby in the helmet dies that night.
They'd come, they'd camp, they'd dance, they'd listen to their idol. There was some disappointment that Dylan's appearance wasn't longer. Nevertheless, they got what they came for, one of the biggest hippie happenings ever. The power of pop had made it a memorable happening, as they say.
Yeah. You know why that came about? It's because the Pathé News people couldn't be asked to wait for Bob Dylan.
Oh, because
they were there in the afternoon.
Because he's the announcer, says Bob Dylan's playing later today, but there's also this one.
Yeah, we were the most visual thing in the afternoon.
I mean,
although Richie Havens was pretty good, but you got to say, but I mean, you know,
Adrian was like a sex god on the stage.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just absolutely.
Oh, he's barreling about the stage.
And
Mike
Evans
he's
pulling his t-shirt up and striking a sexy pose.
All of that,
I mean,
you know.
I have to say that.
Well, it was an act. It was that was it. You know, Tom Paxson, Julie Felix. That was somebody standing behind a microphone singing folk songs. You know, well, they didn't want that. You know, they weren't going to wait for Dylan and the band. They wanted to get off the fucking island before the crowd started leaving. You know, so that was it. We were on at like 1 p.m. or something like that. So the job done. 3 o'clock. Let's go. We got them. So we were on the Pathé News the next day. Yeah.
But I just thought his performance. I mean, I think it was John Peel who said about him. He said he was one of the best non-singers I've ever seen.
Yeah.
He was just brilliant. I think. You know.
For me, it was wonderful because I was shy. I mean, I know out of all of this, you know, you have to factor in the fact that although I was passionate about all the things, you know, the music, the poetry, the theatre, all that kind of stuff, I just loved it. I was steeped in it. But me myself, I sort of represent myself through that passion. But as a person, I was very, very shy, and I was not a natural in the spotlight. And I was handed on a plate by Adrian the chance to be in my favourite place, which is 3 feet to the left of and 1 foot behind the guy in the spotlight, who is brilliant. You know, so he would be barreling on and just bring it on, you know, personality, just radiating from this massive guy, 18 and a half stone he was in those days. And I could just, I mean, you see that Isle of Wight footage, you know, and there's all this stuff going on in the front, and there's this bloke at the back with long hair, just head down, playing guitar. You know, and that's me, that was it. It's like Richard Thompson with the Fairports, you know, the same thing, you know, Richard's not a visual experience, really. In the early days, he was all about the music, and that was me, I was all about the music, really, all that stuff. And we're talking about Zeppelin in America. No, we never toured them in America. What happened was that we did the UK tour, which was, I think, 9 shows. We finished up, the last show was at the Albert Hall. It was part of a week of shows called the Pop Proms. One of them was our tour package, which was Led Zeppelin, Liverpool Scene and Blob and Pig. And then I think the next week they went over to America and they played the Newport Jazz Festival. And they wore, on the Jazz Festival, they wore Liverpool Scene promotional T-shirts that said Bobby and the Helmets, which was a mythical band that we used to talk about with Liverpool Scene. And they all wore Bobby and the Helmets T-shirts, and I think that tended to suggest to people that Liverpool Scene would in some way evolve with Zeppelin in America, because the pictures that emerged from this, which have been used, there's some very high quality pictures of all of Zeppelin wearing Bobby and the Helmets T-shirts, so that associated with the band, with them in America. But we knew them, we saw them in America. When we went to America on tour in September '69, we were in New York at the same time.
Who did you tour with on that one, or was it just you?
It was just, well, we went over as a band, yeah.
But you weren't with a couple of bands?
It wasn't a package, no, we were just looking for individual dates. We played with Sly and the Family Stone, The Association, weird gigs actually. We had, major numbers about Yates's Wine Lodge in Lime Street. You know, it didn't translate. By the time we got there, it's 1969, acid was everywhere. It was Fillmore West in San Francisco, Fillmore East in New York, and we were this weird band, you know, with this very parochial stuff about Liverpool. Our obsessions were different, and also when we weren't playing our music, we were obsessed with jazz and art, paintings, all that kind of thing. Nothing really, and we were playing to audiences, 5,000 kids, all of whom were tripping and kind of lying on the floor like that. And it's fine if you're the Who, or we played with War in Philadelphia, with Eric Burden, and all that. Full tilt rock, and that gets through that kind of narcotic haze. But to be honest, you needed a bit of intellectual smarts for our thing. So mostly it didn't work. It worked best on the show with the Association, who drew us slightly what Americans call a preppy audience, little studenty. But just generally, it hadn't gone well. Nobody was that interested in us. We got some press coverage, we got a bit of support from the record company, so we did interviews and stuff like that, but we lost money hand over fist, and we got back and we had a debt of, I think, around £5,000. It was a lot of money in 1969. So we actually did what I think was probably our most important album when we got back, which the third album, which is called the St. Adrian Company Broadway and Third, I think it was called, which was basically, there was this bar which we inhabited in New York called the St. Adrian Company, which was a very arty bar. But we did a track called Made in USA, and I think that's the single greatest legacy of that band, I tend to think. Although we did a lot of other things, and it doesn't denigrate other things, but I think that was probably, for me, artistically, that was the pinnacle achievement.
America, you're a new bird, eagle, dove, hawk, you're a new bird, spreading your wings faster and farther than any bird before. Out of Kennedy Airport, into the first magic landscape of early evening Manhattan, fingers of light pointing upwards to the sky and the moon.
But by then the band was in massive disarray. We were disagreeing about the direction forward, and I think it was that, you know, the curtains were definitely closing, and this debt hung over us. So when the band broke up quite messily in May 1970 on stage at the London School of Economics,
Nice.
or maybe backstage after the gig, big bust up, and we went, right, that's it, and everybody said, right, tomorrow night's gig is not happening. And it was wound up there and then. My way forward was to leave Liverpool, because I thought, well, okay, I'm in Liverpool, no band, why am I here? No good reason. I'm not going to stay in Liverpool and be, you know, hopefully a big cockroach on a small dung heap. I'm now going to go back home, lick my wounds in London and try and get a career in London. But obviously by then I'd burnt my bridges. I had to do it in music, really. So I left, packed everything up, shoved it in the car, drove off, went to see a girlfriend in Wakefield on the way, and then I drove down to visit Principal Edwards, who were living in a commune style in a place called Moulton Grange in Moulton Grange Farm in Northamptonshire, and proceeded to go and get absolutely rat-arsed with their light sky Les one lunchtime, and then came back and started racing motorbikes round the farmyard, round where they were living, had a massive prang, fell over on a gravel area and absolutely ripped this elbow to shreds. Got hospitalised in Northampton, so that was a complete disaster. And so that had to be patched up, and for the next 4 months this arm was in plaster. And
that was 1970.
1970. So I lived at home with my mum and dad, planning what I was going to do next, and I decided I was going to have my own band.
Gullyfoyle is my name, terror is my nation, deep space is my dwelling place, and death's my destination. Gouffre martel, darkness. Under the rock and earth, a voice. Lying there, your tiger face blazing in the dark. Listening to her voice, your mind still trapped in the broken spaceship. Flaming man appearing like your vengeance on the beach in the three-ring cosmic circus. Your scarred body, your tattooed face, leaping between Aldebaran and Ceres. Eternity at your feet. The stars, your destination.
Bye.